You all know of the significance of Jackie Robinson, the man who courageously broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball. But interestingly, the men responsible for that in the other major professional sports in this country aren't nearly as well known. In the NFL, 4 guys made that happen a year before Jackie played his first game with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Kenny Washington and Woody Strode with the LA Rams, as well as Bill Willis and Marion Motley with the Cleveland Browns. Willie O'Ree became the first African American to play in the NHL with the Boston Bruins in early 1958. In the NBA, there are 3 men who wear that badge. It was during the 1949-50 season that Chuck Cooper became the first black player selected in the draft. Nat Sweetwater Clifton was the first to sign a professional contract with the New York Knicks. And Earl Lloyd, the first to play in a game. It's Clifton's story that is the subject of a new movie that comes out in theaters on Friday, April 14th, aptly titled Sweetwater. And an all-star cast helps to tell that story, including Richard Dreyfuss, Eric Roberts, Kevin Pollak, the Sklar brothers, a cameo from Austin's own Gary Clark Jr., and my next 2 guests. You'll hear from Cary Elwes, he of Princess Bride fame, in just a few minutes. First, though, Jeremy Piven, the Entourage alum, plays Joe Lapchick, the Hall of Fame former Knicks head coach, who fought as hard as anyone to bring Sweetwater to the NBA. Hey, Jeremy, Trey here. We spoke a couple years ago when you were, I think, about to perform at Cap City Comedy Club. So pleasure speaking with you again.
You as well, man. It's been a minute.
It has been. How's everything been since then? Obviously, we've gone through a pandemic and a couple of other things in life.
Yes, and Cap City is back. One of my favorite comedy clubs on the planet. They are back up and running, thank God.
Yes, they are. It's in a new, beautiful space as well. Can't wait to see you back here, getting to perform in that new space. The Helium people do a great job, but that's not the topic at hand today. The topic at hand is this excellent new movie, Sweetwater, that I had the pleasure of watching last night. You're obviously somebody who has become adept over time at telling stories on stage and theater, as part of a cast for TV shows and movies, and then also now in the stand-up world as well. So what is it that you loved about the story being told in Sweetwater enough to want to put your efforts into help making it?
It's just a great story and a story that we didn't know. We didn't know who the Jackie Robinson of basketball was. And we need to know. And the story is just wildly compelling. You don't need to be a sports fan to love this movie. Because it has something for everyone. I play Coach Joe Lapchick, who was the coach of the Knicks in 1950, and he witnesses this player that is playing for the Harlem Globetrotters, and who was coached by a guy named Abe Saperstein, played by Kevin Pollak, who's so funny and brilliant in this. Um, Everett Osborne plays Sweetwater Clifton perfectly. And when I read the script initially, I just thought I never knew the story. And also, I loved Joe Lapchick's heart, the character that I played. He desperately wanted change. He wanted to get this guy, African American player, into an all white league. And, the white owners weren't having it. And he wouldn't retreat. And I really connected with his heart and his passion and his drive to do the right thing.
You mentioned Kevin Pollak. Cary obviously is your co-star in this film, and the supporting cast is crazy. I mean, Eric Roberts makes an appearance, one of the Sklar
Yeah,
brothers. Gary Clark Jr. makes a cameo at one point as well. That had to have been pretty
yeah.
fun to get to be a part of such an ensemble cast like this.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Gary Clark, and he and I have become friends. I've even played with him. I play the drums. I've been honored to play with him a few times. Um, the Sklar brothers are genius at stand up, mixing it up and doing improv and getting all that in. I just basically was living the dream. Kevin Pollak, I'm a huge fan of. He's one of these rare hybrids where he's a great stand up and a great actor.
You mentioned being friends with Gary Clark Jr. Is that how he got involved in this film? Because it was a little bit surprising to see him pop in out of nowhere.
Well, no, I I was on set and I look up and I was like, man, that guy is killing it, and he looks like Gary Clark. That is Gary Clark. And I was like, I was just blown away and so happy. I run into Gary. I remember running in the park in London in the UK and running into him and his wife. Like I was like, wait, what? Like, I probably look like some insane fan that has been stalking him. But we keep running into it. I remember I was playing the drums in a store, in a John Barbados store, where they would have drum kits set up randomly. And I'm just playing and I look up and I was like, man, everyone's dressing like Gary Clark these days. Man, his look is really catching on. And then later I was at this premiere and he was like, hey man, you sounded good on the kit. I was like, that was you? Like having Gary Clark watching me play the drums, there was something, it was very surreal, and so he and I keep running into each other. Martine Gigi, who's the writer director, is a musician. He loves Gary, has a relationship with him and Scooter, his manager, and he graced us with his music and his presence.
I had the pleasure of knowing Gary way back in the day when he was a minor playing on 6th Street, and I have run into him here in Austin from time to time. And as big of a rock star as he's become, it's crazy to see just how modest of a person he is, and that's one of his finest qualities. He's as great of a quality as his guitar playing.
Yeah, he's one of the real ones. I can't imagine him changing. Um, But yeah, he came about it honestly. As you mentioned, he was legendary in the Austin area for being this brilliant player, and he blew up very early on locally, and has never stopped growing and evolving. And yeah, he's inspiring, that's for sure.
So you have Chicago roots. Your family has a theater in the Chicagoland area, very reputable theater up there. I lived in Chicago for about 7 years and unfortunately never made it up for a show, but would always hear about that place. So there's a conversation that happens at the beginning of this movie in Sweetwater where a sports writer gets into a cab and the Bulls game is on. It's talking about Michael Jordan, how incredible Michael Jordan is. And the sports writer's like, yep, Michael Jordan is the GOAT. Nobody's ever done anything like that. And you come to find out throughout the course of the movie, spoiler alert, that the cab driver is somebody special. And so the conversation goes, well, there were people before Michael Jordan who did crazy stuff like that too. I set all of this up to ask you this 3-part question. One, is MJ the GOAT, in your opinion? Basketball GOAT?
Oh, the answer is yes. Of course he's the GOAT.
Is LeBron James number 2 at this point?
Um, it feels like it. It does feel like it, yeah.
So I think that's a fair 1 and 2 rankings. And somebody may put LeBron at number 1, but that's probably a generational thing. I think the interesting question with this debate comes with number 3. So in your opinion, Jeremy, who is the 3rd best basketball player in the history of the sport?
Well, I mean, I like I think we're in this country, we're obsessed with number one, and who's the greatest of all time. And all of these guys, anyone who made it to the NBA has to be an elite player, the best player on every court they've ever walked on. The worst player in the NBA is the best player you will ever see. As they all say, anyone can dunk on you at any moment, they can go off. So we're lucky to watch all of them. That being said, I'm just a fan, so I number three would probably could be, um, you know, Will Chamberlain, Kareem, or Magic. I don't know who to put in those spots. It's hard to say. Do you go Larry Bird? I don't know. But listen, LeBron is one of those guys where I met him very early on when he did a cameo on Entourage.
Hmm.
And, you talk about Gary Clark. I looked into LeBron's eyes the other night at the All-Star game and we connected again. And he very much like Gary feels like that same guy.
Hmm.
He's a 38-year-old kid, you know, um, no more hype uh, with any other player entering the league. And he lived up to all of that and he's still crushing it.
That's
So, is he number one? Is he number two? Who cares? He's still chasing it. He'll probably play with one or both of his kids. And it's miraculous.
Great answer there. He is Jeremy Piven. Check him out in the new movie Sweetwater. He plays the legendary Joe Lapchick, of course, a great player for the Celtics in the 20s and 30s before eventually becoming the coach of the New York Knickerbockers. He's a member of that Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame at this point. Sweetwater will be in theaters on April 14th. Jeremy, thank you for the time once again, and best of luck with things in the future.
Thank you, Trey. I'm sure I'll see you at Cap City soon.
Can't wait.
All right, man. Take care.
Next up is Cary Elwes, who plays Knicks owner Ned Irish. Hey, Cary, thank you so much for the time. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to speak with you for a lot of reasons, including that I just had the opportunity to check out Sweetwater over the last couple of nights. This is a great film, a fun film, a heartfelt film at times as well, obviously. What was it about this movie that, about the story being told here that made you want to put your efforts into help telling it?
Well, a lot of people know the name Jackie Robinson and for being an extraordinary athlete who crossed the color barrier, but nobody really knew about Sweetwater or knows about Sweetwater. In fact, none of the cast, I asked them all, none of us knew anything about it. And to me, it's a crying shame that the man who changed basketball is relatively unknown uh, outside of you know, major basketball players. I had the privilege of interviewing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar before I started the picture, and I said to him, you know, I'm about to start this movie. Is there anything you can tell me? He said, Cary, that's the most important film you're going to make. And I said, why is that, Kareem? He said, because I wouldn't exist without Nat Sweetwater Clifton. Neither would Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan or Kobe or LeBron. None of us. We all stand on this man's shoulders. So, the fact that these giants revered this man for changing basketball, and yet he's so relatively unknown outside that world is a shame. And so, better late than never. We're going to try and change that.
And while Sweetwater is the main focus of this film, him getting to become that first African-American player in the NBA was the result of some people working to try and make that happen. And you play one of those people with Knicks owner Ned Irish, who, of course, back in the 1950s when this was happening, he was going to have to take a lot of strife to try and cross that color barrier, if you will. Was that something that you looked at as a fun challenge in helping to play this character as somebody that was going to have to deal with such ridiculousness, but a lot of negativity as a result of him trying to do what was right?
Yeah, that's a good point, Trey, because these guys had to straddle that line of being bound by absurd, archaic league regulations, and yet understanding that they were absurd in the end. And thank God that Ned and Lapchick ended up being on the right side of history. I think, Ned took a lot more persuading because these guys were operating out of fear. Yeah, as many were at that time. Fear of the unknown and not understanding the importance and significant cultural and historical and sociological importance. But thank God, Ned, you know, wiser heads prevailed, and he understood that he needed to be on the right side of history. You know.
Considering the importance of this story, it's not surprising that there are a number of reputable actors who wanted to help lend their faces and voices to it. Obviously, you're a part of this, as is Jeremy, who I had the pleasure of speaking with a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Eric Roberts, Kevin Pollak. I
Yeah.
mean, Richard Dreyfuss, Gary Clark
Yeah.
makes a cameo at one
Yeah.
point. The Sklar brothers as well. I mean, that had to have felt pretty good to be surrounded by so much talent and helping to make this movie.
Well, like I said, I think everybody understood the importance of telling Sweetwater's story. And the director had this project for 28 years, and that just gives you an idea of the level of passion. And nobody wanted to make it. And so, these films are harder and harder to make, Trey. But thank God we were able to. We had this terrific producer, Tim Moore, who who's Clint Eastwood's producer, and he really took up the gauntlet and said, you know what, I'm going to help make this picture happen. And he helped us raise all the money, and here we are. So, they're harder to make, but I think it's worth the effort because we need to honor this man. He changed basketball as we know it, and yet is, as I said, relatively unknown. So.
You'd like to think that a story like this is going to have staying power, that the movie's not going to only be enjoyed when it releases in theaters on April 14th, but years and decades from now, people will still be going back to this film to learn of the Sweetwater story. But that's not an exact science here. I mean, obviously, you are a part of one of the most renowned films of all time with The Princess Bride, something that I enjoyed at the age of 9 or 10 that I just got to share with my 8 and 6-year-old for the very first time.
Right on.
They loved it as much as I did back in the late 1980s. Considering all the great work that you've done over the last several decades now, have you started to been able to better figure out what is going to have that staying power versus what doesn't?
If I knew that, I'd be a producer, Trey. Bill Goldman once told me nobody in Hollywood knows anything. And by that, he meant nobody knows what makes a hit film, because if they did, they'd be making them every day. It's a gamble, yeah? But these films, I think, are important because, for me, if you look at the body of my work, I really gravitate towards historical films, the films that have historical relevance. But when a project comes along that has both historical relevance and cultural and sociological relevance, then I'm all in. And this one checked all those boxes.
You tend to gravitate towards historical films because just naturally you have a love for history in your personal life.
It was the only subject I was any good at in school, Trey. So I thought I'd better play to my strengths.
What is a period that you're most fascinated by?
I'm fascinated by anything. Because this wonderful philosopher once said, I think his name was Georges Santayana, he said, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. And we are living in those times right now, my friend.
Yeah, sadly, you are not incorrect about that. I did want to ask you a question or two about that period piece that you probably get hit up on way too much in your life. I am referencing, of course, Robin Hood Men in Tights. I am jealous of your experience in that movie for a couple of different reasons. One is the fact that you got to work with the legendary Mel Brooks. What was that like?
Well, what can I say? I'd still call him Rabbi to this day because he's the Rabbi of comedy. He's the king of comedy, and we're still very close. I adore him, and we cast Dave Chappelle, and man, that was the best decision we ever made. But yeah, it was a joy. Every day was laughter. Every day. Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about that because I first came to know about Dave Chappelle because of that movie, and I would go and see him at the Improv and other small theaters as he was really coming up as a stand-up comedian shortly after that. And here we are all these years later, and he is maybe one of the greatest stand-up comedians of all time, certainly of this generation.
All time.
Could you see
no question
the seeds of that when you guys were working hard to
100%. 100%. I became obviously very fond of Dave, and we're very tight, and I have enormous respect for him, not only as a friend, but as a performer. He's extraordinary. I think he's like a soothsayer. He's unafraid of telling us what we need to hear, sometimes when we may not want to.
Very well put there. Here's Cary Elwes. Check out his new movie, Sweetwater. It is in theaters on April 14th. Cary, thank you so much for the time today, and thank you for this wonderful film.
Thank you, Trey. I appreciate that.
Thanks to Gentleman Jesus for the intro and outro music. Hear more of his work at gentlemanjesus.com. And thanks to you for tuning in. For more of the show and to connect on social media, visit booksonpod.com. We'll talk to you next time on Books on Pod.